1993, when Chicago Bulls guard John Paxson sunk the series-winning shot in Game 6 of the NBA Finals, Mark Schanowski was there reporting. In 1988, when Michael Jordan beat Dominique Wilkins in what is considered the greatest, most controversial slam dunk duel of all time, David Schuster was there reporting.
What kind of expectations do you set for yourself individually going into your career?
In 2010, when Derrick Rose said,
"Why can't I be the MVP of the league? Why can't I be the best player in the league? I don't see why. Why can't I do that?"
It was Mark Schanowski who asked the question.
It is my distinct honor to present the 2010-2011 NBA Most Valuable Player Award to Derrick Rose of the Chicago Bulls.
In 2011, when Rose accepted the Most Valuable Player award to become the youngest MVP in the history of the league, David Schuster was there reporting. Schanowski, Schuster, two of Chicago's most accomplished NBA reporters. This is Sharpshooters.
And welcome into the latest edition of the Sharpshooters. I'm David Schuster, and that much more handsome guy on my right here on the screen, that, of course, is Mark Schanowski. And Mark, 2 games down, 2 to go for the Bulls preseason, drubbed by Houston on Friday night at an empty the United Center, of course. But then last night, Sunday, we're recording this on Monday, a big fourth quarter, and they came back and they won the game. So your impressions on the first 2 games?
Yeah, I thought the first game was kind of troubling in that the defense was just non-existent. Of course, Houston came out guns a-blazing. We thought they might change their style with a new front office and a new coaching staff, but they're still a 3-point dominant offense, and they were hitting like crazy on Friday night. The Bulls were a little bit slow to react. They didn't really close out on shooters, and you're thinking, oh, my gosh, hopefully this isn't the start of what's going to be a disastrous season. But in the first game on Friday, I thought Patrick Williams, the rookie, looked very poised. I thought he played very well. That was a big bright spot. Noah Vonleh actually looked pretty good coming off the bench, but that was mostly garbage time in the second half. And then Sunday was an improvement. Their defense was better, albeit Houston didn't shoot it nearly as well from the three-point line as they did on Friday night. But I thought they took some positive steps. I thought Kobe White did a better job running the offense. And, of course, Zach LaVine, we know how he can score, can light it up very quickly from just about any spot on the court. And that was the normal Zach LaVine that we saw in the game on Sunday. So all in all, they showed some growth from Friday to Sunday. And since really they just started training camp a week ago, I think that's a pretty good positive for Bulls fans.
Yeah, LaVine had 23 points last night, most of them coming in the first half. Kobe White, as you mentioned, had a nice floor game. He also scored 20 points. Wendell Carter, I mean, I know they talk about him shooting three-pointers. Guess what? Don't shoot him very often. You're not very good at it. He's only 1 of 8 so far through the first 2 preseason games. You know, the bigger story, though, and it might be still developing, is that a lot of players were excused from last night's game, excused absences. You know, it makes you think right away there's something going on with COVID. Thomas Satoransky didn't play last night. Luke Cornett, Devon Dotson, they were all excused from the game. Billy Donovan after the game, and we'll hear from him in just a little bit here, basically saying, you know, I can't really say much. And they're not practicing today, Monday. Again, we're recording this late Monday morning. So I think they're trying to sort things out over at the Advocate Center. It's a scary proposition what's going to happen, not only with the Bulls, but every team in the NBA. You have to expect, you know, it happened in baseball, it happened in football, and for sure it's going to happen in basketball.
Yeah, I was going to say, David, we saw it with both football and baseball that when one player would test positive, then they would try to do the contact tracing to see which players he was in close contact with. But the reality of it is, with any sports team, you're going through practices, you're in the locker room, you're in close contact with everyone on the team. I don't know how you can determine, yeah, I was really close with these 3 guys, but I wasn't close with the other 10. So, you know, the 4 guys that missed yesterday, you wonder why they decided that those were the players that might have been in the most danger. You know, we heard that, one player's in the protocol, the other one had excused absences, and it is a little bit alarming. We're going to see this throughout the NBA, throughout the course of the season. We've already seen a ton of college basketball games being postponed or canceled. So when you consider basketball being played indoors, the close proximity of the players, this is going to be an issue that's not going to go away anytime soon, unless we hear that all of a sudden they try to fast track getting the vaccine to pro sports leagues, which would create a political issue that is above and beyond, our qualifications to talk about.
Yeah, but you know what, Mark, actually thinking about that very quickly, that might actually be a good thing because obviously athletes are role models to a lot of people. And if you see the NBA players, the hockey players, football, basketball, across the board, on national TV, rolling up their sleeves and getting a vaccination. And I'm going to go on my soapbox here. You better get that vaccination, everybody, because that's the only way you're going to beat this pandemic, in my estimation. So I don't think that would be a bad thing, actually, for athletes. A LeBron James on national TV, that'll change a lot of people's minds to go ahead and do it. I think it's a good thing, actually.
Well, of course, their first priority is getting it to all the healthcare workers and people who are at the most risk of getting the illness. And I think that if they decided all of a sudden to say, well, our next priority is to make sure our pro sports leagues are functioning, I think you'll get a lot of pushback from political officials, especially in the other party once the Biden administration takes over, that, hey, what's going on? Why are you taking care of the pro sports leagues and other people are waiting to get the vaccine? It's, no matter how they roll out the vaccine, it's going to become politicized. There's going to be arguments over why is this group getting it as opposed to that group. And it's going to be a very difficult thing. I don't envy the incoming Biden administration to try to figure out how to handle best the mess that's been left in their lap. And it's going to be a big issue. I agree with you, David, that I think that the pro sports leagues have a real vital role in our country. And I think you could argue that it's important to keep those leagues running in terms for, the mental health of the country, for giving entertainment to the people who are forced to quarantine during these winter months. I think you could make that argument. But as you know, in our country, everything becomes political.
Yeah, well, I know one thing for sure. I'm not essential, so I'm going to be all the way at the back of the pack. So maybe by next fall, I might finally get in line. We're going to hear
me both.
Yeah. Again, we're going to hear from a lot of the Bulls players and Billy Donovan in just a second, but I want to pick up on one of the things that you've already mentioned. I was really impressed with Patrick Williams. I really was. I mean, obviously, he's got great size, even from watching on TV, and I wasn't at the games. I hope to get to the games in the near future. You could see his hands are so big that basketball in his hand, it looks like a yo-yo. He was a point guard, obviously, for a long time before he finally hit his growth spurt halfway through high school. He started high school, I think, even under 6 feet tall. But that ball is just so easy coming out of his hand, dribbling it, and he just seems to have a knowledge of where he is on the court. Now, he only shot 4 of 12 yesterday, but still, I like his aggressiveness even in yesterday's game. He just seems to have a feel. It's only 2 games. We're going to have to see him with our own eyes for quite a while here before we come to our conclusion of what we see in him. But I like what I saw of him in these first 2 games.
Yeah, you mentioned his hands. Jerry Krause would have loved Patrick Williams. Of course, we've heard all the stories about Jerry. That was one of his important measurables, is how big were their hands and how big were their parents' hands to see, what his genes look like. So I think that Patrick Williams, the thing that impressed me the most, David, is that, especially in Friday's game, he looked so under control, so poised for a guy who came off the bench in his one college season and just turned 19 in August. He doesn't seem to be in a hurry. He seems to be able to get a good feel for the other 9 players on the court, where potential double teams might be coming. He also looked pretty good on the defensive end in terms of being able to switch out on guards and move his feet and stay in front of smaller, quicker players. I was very impressed. His shot looked very good on Friday. As you mentioned, he struggled a bit from the field. He knocked down a couple of 3-pointers late on Sunday night. All in all, I think that you saw that he was the first guy off the bench on Sunday. So Billy Donovan's going to want to get him out there. I know a lot of players were missing in Sunday's game, but I think he's already impressed this coaching staff that he can be a part of this rotation right away. And I think there's good things ahead for Patrick Williams.
Absolutely. I was looking at some of the other high draft picks, what they've done, in their initial game. Denny Avdia, he was 6 of 6 from the floor in yesterday's game. So, that nice, impressive start by him. But Obi Toppin, good luck with Tom Thibodeau, by the way. Obi Toppin just 1 of 9 from the field. Killian Hayes with the Pistons, 2 of 11. Although he's going to learn a lot from Derrick Rose, I'll give him that for sure. But it's very, very, very early, obviously. But again, I like what Patrick Williams. He's just got a poise and a feel about him that I can't really put my finger on totally. And he's definitely got a man's body already.
Yeah, I think Williams is going to be a very big bright spot for the Bulls this season. I think he's going to move into a prominent role as the season goes on. The other rookie that you didn't mention, who I watched a little bit of the other night, I watched some of the Charlotte game. LaMelo Ball looked really good. I'm telling you what, that kid, his vision, we've talked about it before on podcasts. The way he sees the floor, he was getting rebounds and throwing long outlet passes like a Kevin Love or a Wes Unseld going back in the day. This kid is going to be special, and I think he's really going to help the Hornets.
Well, they said that he was the most talented player in the draft. I think Minnesota and maybe Golden State, although I think Wiseman will pan out there for Golden State in the long run. But I think Minnesota might regret it that they didn't take him with that number 1 pick.
Yeah, they were looking at the fact that they just traded for D'Angelo Russell last year, and he's a ball-dominant point guard. They didn't want to have two similar players in their backcourt. But you know what? When you're one of the worst teams in the league, you try to get the most talent you possibly can on your roster, and you figure it out later. I think that you certainly could have played Ball and Russell together. I think Ball is really going to be an impact player in the NBA, and I agree with you. Anthony Edwards, I think he's just a guy. I think Minnesota made a mistake there.
All right. Well, in our second half of today's podcast, we're going to preview the Eastern Conference and go through the 3 divisions in the Eastern Conference. And we'll tease a little bit and say that on our next podcast next week, we'll do the same thing for the Western Conference. But for right now, Mark, we're talking about the Bulls. And let's hear from Billy Donovan, because, again, the story beyond the game last night was the absence of so many players and the fear that it might be COVID related. Here's Billy Donovan earlier this week talking about playing this upcoming season with COVID hanging over everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be certainly challenging. We were on a call yesterday, about the protocols and, what we're trying to do to maintain the safety for everybody involved. But there's probably going to be times with travel that, we're going to come in contact with the virus and certain teams and, maybe hit harder than others. But, I think everybody here in our organization is trying to do the very, very best job they can to just make sure we're trying to create a healthy and safe environment, not only, in the facility, but also, away from the facility, even when we're at home. So, I think we all understand that in coming back to play, there are some risks, with it. Hopefully the vaccine can come out, and I'm not sure when we'll be able to utilize that. But, yeah, I mean, there's a lot to juggle, and we're just trying to take, all the necessary protocols to keep, each other safe in this environment.
And let's hear from one more soundbite for right now. Here's Zach LaVine after last night's game. He was basically asked, well, how concerning is this, and what's the conversation like in the locker room?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you want to be concerned because, if somebody come down with it in the locker room, you don't want it to spread. So you just try to, stay in communication with everybody. Obviously everybody's going to, this locker room talk too, so we're not going to shy away from it. And, it's something that we're going to have to deal with from now on. So it'll be something new.
It's really a frightening prospect here, Mark, because I mean, what happens if it does? Let's just talk about the Lakers for starters, okay? The team to beat. Let's just say one of their main players in the starting lineup comes down with COVID. And as you alluded to, they're all in close proximity in that locker room, and it spreads around the whole team. LeBron gets it. Anthony Davis gets it. They all get it. What are you going to do? Are you going to cancel the Lakers games for the next 2 weeks? What are you going to do?
It's going to be a real problem, David, and I'm sure that Adam Silver and his top officials, roll over in bed at night wondering what happens if our premier teams are hit with an outbreak. And it is an issue, and there's nothing that they can say that they can absolutely guarantee that this won't happen with a number of teams in the league. And that's why it may come to the point where the political leaders in our country decide that the pro sports leagues are important for the mental well-being, and they get this vaccine rolled out to all the pro sports leagues. When you think about the number of players involved in the NBA and the NHL, it really isn't that large of a number. I think you could distribute it pretty efficiently, and hopefully there wouldn't be a ton of pushback because all of our government leaders, federal and local, are telling us to stay home. Don't get together for Thanksgiving. Don't have your families together for Christmas. Well, if we're all going to make that sacrifice, at least give us professional sports to watch on TV that can be continued in an orderly manner without all these stops and starts. So maybe that will be something that we hear in the coming weeks, that it will become a secondary priority is to make sure that the pro sports leagues get the vaccine and can function normally.
Interesting question. And for what it's worth, I mean, when you talk about the economy, pro sports is a major part of the economy. And so maybe that, goes hand in hand with everything. All right, before we get back to hearing from the Bulls, and Wendell Carter will be the next player that we listen to, I want to talk just about the Houston Rockets. And as you alluded to right at the top, same old Houston Rockets. James Harden wasn't there and Westbrook has moved on, but they're the same old Rockets. And what did they? I think they made 24 3-pointers on Friday night. It was unbelievable. But anyway, Harden isn't there. John Wall looked pretty damn good, specifically in Friday night's game, and Cousins looked pretty good also. But James Harden says he wants out, even already again today. He wants out. He wants to go to either Brooklyn or Philadelphia. Philadelphia is obviously not going to trade Simmons or Embiid. Brooklyn would almost have to, this would be funnier than heck, Brooklyn would almost have to trade Kyrie Irving to make this trade work, but they're not going to do that. So in the long run, he might just have to sit still in Houston unless there's some kind of 3 or 4-way deal with other teams involved.
I watched some of the Brooklyn game yesterday. They played Washington. Our friend Sarah Kustak was on the call, so I always try to catch her whenever I can. And I'll tell you what, Brooklyn looked really good last night. I only watched parts of the game, but that Durant-Kyrie combo, that's the real deal. Those guys work well together. They can really put up a lot of points. And I think it would be a disaster. We talked about this on a previous show that, to put James Harden, another ball-dominant player, in with Kyrie and KD, I think that's a recipe for disaster. I think Brooklyn is going to be a contender in the East the way they're currently structured. They have good depth. They've got some good players on the wings. They got a couple of centers who can rebound and block shots. I think that's a good team the way it is. If I'm Brooklyn, I wouldn't even consider the possibility of giving up multiple players and draft picks for James Harden. Now, Philadelphia is a bit of a different story. They've underachieved the last couple of years. I think, though, if I'm the Rockets, the only way I would make a trade with Philadelphia is Ben Simmons has to be coming back. And if Philadelphia says that's a non-starter, well, they're out. So then you look at Milwaukee and Miami, which are two other teams that Harden has said he would consider going to. Milwaukee has no draft picks because of the Drew Holiday trade. So what are they going to give him? Chris Middleton, that's not going to move the needle for Houston. And I don't think Miami's going to break up their team after getting to the finals last year. So like it or not, I think James Harden is just going to have to suck it up and play at least the first half of the season with the Rockets and see if maybe injuries or some other factors change the equation. But I don't really think there's a destination for Harden unless maybe he wants to go to a team like a Denver that has a lot of young players and draft picks that might consider a trade. I think for now, he's stuck in Houston. And he should just make the best of it. He should honor his contract. He's got 2 more years plus a player option. He committed to Houston on a long-term extension. He should report. Well, he has reported. He's going through COVID protocol. Once he's cleared, he should play. He should keep his mouth shut and just try to do the best he can. Because what we saw from the Rockets these last 2 games, they're not a contender in the West, but they certainly look like a playoff team to me.
I couldn't agree more with everything that you just said. And by the way, we'll hear from Kevin Durant a little bit later on in this podcast. But right now, let's go back to hearing from the Bulls. And Wendell Carter will be the first one up. Obviously, watching the games at the United Center, the last couple of games, the last Friday and Sunday night, weird. Just looking at the United Center, they have all the seats covered up, and the players are all distanced, even sitting behind the bench, and the media is basically sitting on the roof, way, way, way away from the court. Anyway, let's hear from Wendell Carter. He talks about what it's like playing basically in an empty building.
I feel like it's a perfect opportunity for us to rely on one another. Going into these situations, especially throughout this whole season, going into a lot of empty arenas. We're going to have to bring our own energy to every game, and I think that's going to actually help us in the future. To when the fans do come back into the arena and things like that, we'll be able to still have that energy that we're bringing, and then the fans will just give us an extra boost. So I feel like it's a perfect opportunity for us to grow as a team.
Only 2 games, Mark, but again, something's missing with him already. Yeah, they're trying to get him more involved, specifically on the perimeter, and he's been shooting 3-pointers, and he missed his first 7 before finally making one last night. I'm sorry, I just don't want to see Wendell Carter shooting. He's not a 3-point shooter. I don't know what else to say on that.
Did the one he make, did that kiss off the glass? I was trying to figure out on the angle. Yeah, so you can't even count that because if you bank it in from the corner, you didn't really shoot a true ball. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to make conclusions off of 2 preseason games. But, after watching him the last 2 years, I just don't think that his talent merited where he was taken in the draft. I think he could be a nice NBA rotation player, but he's a little undersized as a center. He doesn't really have the skill requisite to be an NBA 4. So I just think that, he can be a productive rotation guy, but I don't think if people are looking for him to be a upper level player in the NBA, I just don't know if we see that in Wendell Carter.
All right, next up, we'll hear from Lauri Markkanen. And you know what, Mark, we can say the same thing about Markkanen as we can say about Wendell Carter. Disappointing last season, disappointing through the first 2 games so far, really has not gotten involved. I mean, the backcourt with Levine and Kobe White, yeah, they look really good already. The front court, not as much. Obviously, again, you can't come to too much conclusions. But here's Lauri Markkanen talking about basically coming off a dud season last year.
I mean, obviously, of course, it motivates me even more, but I'm not taking any pressure on that. I'm just trying to play at a high level, the level I can play with, and I know last season wasn't the best, so I'm just trying to bounce back from that. But I don't take any extra pressure from people outside.
What can you say about him? I mean, I still think he is maybe, along with Kobe White, the most important person on this starting 5 because you got to get production out of this guy, and he has such a height advantage over a lot of the players that he's going to be going against. But I do like what Billy Donovan has said about him. He wants to get him involved closer to the basket before moving outside. I mean, again, it's the old adage, make a layup before you hit a jump shot.
Yeah, there were some mixed results from Lauri in these 2 games. I thought he showed some signs on Friday of what we saw in his first 2 years in the league. They ran some weak side action where he was coming off screens and diving to the basket. I thought some of that stuff looked good. There was the one play on Sunday where they ran a high screen and roll with him and Wendell Carter. He made the nice alley-oop pass to Carter for the jam, but his shot was off yesterday. I believe he was 1 of 10 from the field and, didn't really have a good game shooting the basketball. I don't worry too much about a poor shooting night for a guy like Lauri, who we know has NBA 3-point range. The key for him is going to be more involved, to be more active in their half-court sets. And I did notice in both games that Billy is running some stuff where, he's getting guys on the move. He's trying to get stuff where the weak side is involved in the play, not just, loading up one side and having 2 guys stand waiting to catch and shoot. So, again, it's very early. I know that the Bulls are committed to making this work with Lauri Markkanen, and I know he is as well. Fortunately, he banged knees yesterday and had to leave the game a little bit early. Hopefully that's not going to be an issue going forward. But, it's early, and I'm still hoping that Markkanen can get back to what we saw in his first 2 years in the league.
All right, speaking of Billy Donovan and his offense, let's hear from Thad Young next, where he talks about Donovan's offense. Unfortunately, Thad has had a little bit of a hamstring problem, and he hasn't really played so far. Anyway, let's hear from Thad Young on Billy Donovan's offense.
It's super simple. I think he gives everybody the opportunity to feel like they're a part of the offense. I think another thing is that it's a flow offense. Like it's a lot of movement, a lot of motion. And we all can make reads and cuts, with the basketball or without the basketball, and just understanding those reads and cuts. I think he's done a really good job of just breaking down every single thing that we want to go out there and do. Him and the coaching staff, they've been great. Going out there, I think the biggest thing for us is just continue to build culture, continue to build what we're doing. And like I said, just using every moment as a teaching session for us.
I remember Jim Boylan talking about his offense being ball movement. I don't know what he was doing at all, but this coach does have ball movement in his offense. There's no question about that.
Yeah, I think that it's going to be encouraging, and it's a work in progress. They've only had a handful of practices, and they get thrown in and play a couple of games. It's not going to look smooth this early on. I think that it's going to get better as we get more normal rotations and the players get more comfortable in the system. I'm not too panicked about any of the things that didn't go well in the first 2 games. I think they'll get better as we go. We're going to talk about the Eastern Conference later, and I think that's the larger issue is that even though the Bulls are going to be better, I think some of the bottom feeders are going to have made bigger improvements than what the Bulls did. So a jump in the standings may be a little bit difficult for this season.
All right, before we get to talk about the Eastern Conference, a couple of other tidbits in basketball. Unfortunately, Jimmy Collins passed away over the weekend. Kendall Gill obviously would be so passionate in talking about his former coach and longtime friend because Kendall was recruited by Jimmy Collins. Jimmy Collins was an assistant coach. Well, going much further back, Jimmy Collins was a hell of a player in his day at New Mexico. And then eventually he was drafted by the Bulls, played for a couple of seasons with the Bulls. Then he went back to college. He was an assistant coach under Lou Henson. Then he came up to Champaign with Lou Henson and was his number one recruiter. And he recruited most, if not all, the players on that 89 team. He was so good at recruiting the inner city for Chicago, leading up to that 89 Final Four team. Kendall was part of that, of course, and so many other players. And then after he was passed over to be the head coach, after Henson left, he came up to UIC and got the Flames into the NCAAs on 3 different occasions. I remember the first year team, and I forget what year it is. I'm terrible on years, but they were an exciting product. So Jimmy Collins, was a legend in Chicago for recruiting and for so many other reasons. And it's just a real blow to all the people down in Champaign.
David, we should get Grobstein on. He could tell you every second about what happened at UIC. Probably more hockey, though, than talking about basketball.
Jimmy, I was going to say, let's not get Grobstein on, but okay, I got your point.
That's a whole different show. Yeah. Jimmy was one of my favorite coaches to ever work with. David, you and I make no secret of the fact that we're older than dirt. And I worked in Champaign from 1982 to 87, which was kind of a golden era of Illinois basketball. And Jimmy was an assistant for Lou Henson, and he recruited so many of those great players during that time. And I got to know Jimmy really well. And he's one of my favorite guys to talk to. Just a bright light in the coaching profession. I tweeted the other day that when the news came out that, when you talk to Jimmy, you always left with a smile on your face because he was so engaging, so upbeat. He just really loved basketball. He loved dealing with people. And, the recruiting game can get ugly and it's very difficult. And he never let that stuff get him down. There were NCAA issues that they had to deal with, and the whole thing with Iowa reportedly turning in Jimmy Collins for recruiting violations. And then, of course, he didn't get the job at Illinois, as you mentioned, and went to UIC. And when you consider a middling program like that to go to the NCAA tournament 3 times, he did a remarkable job over there. I mean, his coaching resume was really impressive. And I remember one story when he was trying to recruit the late, great Benji Wilson at Simeon. And he was telling me that we're going to get this guy. He's the next Magic Johnson. We're in on him. And I think he's coming to Illinois. And that's one of the sad chapters, really, in college basketball history, especially here in Chicago. What would Illinois have been if they had been able to add the great Ben Wilson to the team that they had in the mid-'80s?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to so many people. I saw Ben Wilson only play 1 game, but other people saw him play numerous times. I mean, I saw highlights, of course, on TV. They said he would have been probably the best player ever to come out of Chicago.
Yeah.
And Mark, that is saying an awful lot just in itself.
Sure.
Yeah, so that's just a terrible tragedy. All right, let's go through the Eastern Conference. We'll start in the Central Division, of which the Bulls are. We've basically talked about the Bulls, and I'm not going in any order. I just have, what I wrote down here. We'll start with the Cleveland Cavaliers. And the Cavaliers, I don't know, they're a mess. There's just, I don't know what direction they're going in. I don't think they know either. Andre Drummond is still in the middle there after coming over from Detroit, and I don't think he's going to be there in the long run. And he's sort of like an old-time center. When he plays against the Bulls, he's a 20-20 machine all the time. But, against everybody else, he's getting long in the tooth also. They still have those 2 guards. I don't understand why they drafted in back-to-back years, why they drafted basically 2 point guards. Kevin Love is, that contract is weighing them down. And then they drafted Okoro. I mean, what do you make out of Cleveland? They're just a hodgepodge.
Yeah, it is an odd collection of players, but, I'm very high on Okoro. He had 18 points in his preseason debut, and people said he can't shoot and he can't score. If he's giving you offense to go along with that tenacious defense, he's going to be really good in the NBA, and I think Cleveland got a good pick there. But it really all comes down to what they can develop with those 2 young guards, Colin Sexton and Darius Garland. Those guys have to become upper-level players if Cleveland's going to do much of anything. They still have Kevin Love and Andre Drummond. They also have another young guard in Kevin Porter Jr., who's had some off-the-court issues. It is kind of an odd mix of players. They look like they're probably going to be either the last-place team or 4th because Detroit is just as bad. They have a lot of work to do, but Okoro was a nice pick. They had a need at the small forward spot. They're starting to put some things together, but unless Sexton and Garland develop, they're going to be at the bottom for quite a while.
Yeah, all right. Speaking of a mess, and you already mentioned Detroit, and boy, if Cleveland's a mess, Detroit is a double mess. Blake Griffin, I don't know if he's ever going to be the player that he was before his knee injury, because he certainly wasn't when he came back. He was still hobbling after trying to come back. Derrick Rose is still there. God bless him. Derrick played well in the game last night. And Killian Hayes, of course, is the heir apparent at the point guard position. But what do you make out of Detroit? I mean, I can't figure out what they're doing either.
Yeah, I guess it really comes down to how many games is Blake Griffin going to play and at what energy level is he going to play at. A lot of the games that we've seen from Blake in the last couple of years, it looked like he was just going through the motions. I don't know if it's just that he's unhappy with being in Detroit after all his years in LA, playing with a team that he knows has no chance to go to the playoffs. But his attitude has looked a little bit shaky the last couple of years. And I don't know how invested he is in that whole situation. Maybe he'll try to play a little bit harder early in the year and convince a contending team to bring him on for the stretch run in a trade. That Derrick, of course, we wish him the best at all times. Hopefully he'll continue to build off of what he did last season with the Pistons. But, they had a very weird draft. Killian Hayes is a guy a lot of scouts like. I'm not so sure how good he's going to be at the NBA level. They added a bunch of centers who are middling players. I think Detroit is going to be one of the worst teams in the league this year.
All right, Indiana's in the division. Indiana, Oladipo came back from his injury, talking about Blake Griffin, and I don't know if he's the same player after his injury either. I mean, Brogdon is still there. We both like Brogdon a lot. Sabonis has been a lot better player in the NBA than I thought. He's not like his daddy, but he's still a hell of a player. And then even Turner in the middle. He's undersized, but this guy really balls out there. I'm really impressed with him. But something tells me Indiana, I don't know, they're missing something. I can't put my finger on it. They're not an exciting team by any stretch, and now they have a new coach on top of everything.
Yeah, I think Indiana could take a fall this year. It's pretty much the same personnel. They didn't have their first-round draft pick, so they really weren't able to add much. I thought they overachieved the last couple of years under Nate McMillan and did a great job, and then, of course, was shown the door because they lost in the first round of the playoffs each of the last few years. Bjorkgren comes in as the head coach. I don't know exactly what he's going to do in terms of trying to change that team. I know they always thought they could get a little bit more to Miles Turner. He tried to add the three-point shot to his arsenal last year and had some success shooting from distance. But to me, it's a team that, has kind of overachieved, and I think they may take a step back. I think Atlanta's going to be really good this year. I think they're going to jump up a little bit. And the Pacers, while they'll be in the mix for that 6, 7, 8 range, there is a chance that maybe they could fall and maybe one of the teams that has to be involved in the play-in situation.
All right, and then, of course, there's Milwaukee. They're still the cream of the crop, at least in the Central Division, if not the Eastern Conference. It all starts with Giannis, and by the way, the clock is ticking. The 21st comes up pretty quickly, and we don't hear anything on it, at least not here. Down here, we don't. Middleton, I still like. He's a great mid-range jump shooter. Lopez in the middle. They did get up Holiday, but they didn't get Bogdanovich. I'd be really curious to get the honest thoughts of what's going through Giannis's mind right now.
Well, David, you and I are veterans of listening to press conferences and player interviews, and we can read between the lines of what's being said. I'll tell you what, as a Bucks fan, the alarm bells went off in my head when I heard Giannis's comments last week. Everything he said was code for thanks, but I'm not going to be here after this year. The stuff that I'm not going to worry about the contract. I'm just focusing on basketball. That's code for there's no way in hell I'm signing that extension, so you guys better get used to it and stop asking me all these questions about it. He said the fact that it's up to my agent and the front office to negotiate the deal. It's a super max extension. There's nothing to negotiate. You either sign it or you don't. So, and then there was something on Instagram the other day where the team barber thanked Giannis for his 6 years and wishes his family well going forward. I mean, I tell you what, if he signs it in the next week or so, I'll be proven wrong, but I don't see any way that he's signing that extension.
All right, so considering that, Mark, and if Milwaukee knows that, I mean, they sort of indicated they were going to roll the dice during the season. I can't believe that. Is there at least the chance that he could be traded within the next week?
Well, if you're convinced as the Bucks organization that he's leaving, you could trade him to Houston for James Harden. It'd be a terrible trade for the Bucks, but at least you'd get an all-star player, a former MVP who could carry your offense. You would instantly descend from the ranks of contending teams, but you'd still be a team to watch with James Harden as your centerpiece. Of course, Harden would be furious and he would threaten to leave again, and it'd be a whole nother can of worms. But yeah, I mean, if you're convinced as the Bucks organization that he's gone, you could trade him for James Harden. That would be something they could do.
Oh my God, the soap operas in the NBA never cease to amaze me. All right, let's go to the Atlantic Division. We're going to hear from Kevin Durant here in just a second here, but it starts with Brooklyn. They got Durant, they got Irving, they got Jared Allen, they got Karis LeVert. I mean, they are a loaded team. I mean, they are the team to beat, obviously, in that division, and maybe the whole conference.
Yeah, I tell you what, I don't know exactly what sound you have coming up, but I saw the one thing where Kyrie Irving, of course, was fined $25,000 for not honoring his media responsibilities. And then he put something on Instagram with him and Kevin Durant talking. That was one of the strangest things I've seen on social media in a long time, because basically Kyrie was trying to state the case for he should be the focal point of the offense. And KD was saying, hold on, we'll have to see. I mean, Kyrie was saying he wanted to have 8 post-ups a game where he could dominate against other guards in the post. And KD was like, well, maybe I'll give you 2.5. I mean, as you mentioned, soap opera, that is the definition of soap opera. What's going to go on with Irving and Durant all season long?
You know, it's funny. Irving was talking about the media, and he says the media is a bunch of pawns. And, you know, and he's partly right. I mean, we are pawns in a certain way. And I've been called a lot of things over the years. I don't know if I've ever been called a pawn, maybe a rook, or a knight or a queen or a king, part of the chess game or something.
Well, we're all waiting for the new Netflix series, Schuster's Gambit.
Yes, I'll take it. Anyway, I mean, Kyrie Irving's just a nut job. But let's hear from Kevin Durant. He did play in last night's game. His shot was a little bit off, but here he is talking about finally returning to the court from last night's game.
Oh, I mean, I felt great in the first half. Second half, I didn't focus in enough on the shots that I took. I wish I'd have made all of those shots. I took a bad 3 to start the quarter, and that kind of threw me off rhythm a little bit. So, I mean, it's good to just go through this stuff again, man, you know, and I'll watch film tomorrow and just keep growing.
You've got yourself, Kyrie, great depth on this roster. What is the process like developing identity for a new era of Nets basketball?
Well, individually, we all got to come, you know, bring what we bring best to the table. And then, you know, collectively, we got to continue to find a way to integrate everybody into the offense and defense. And I think from top to bottom, you know, guys are looking forward to the season, they look forward to the day. And we came out here and had a solid showing.
Kevin Durant's a great, great, great talent, you know, and he was challenging LeBron for being the best player on the planet when he was out at Golden State and at the top of his game, and unfortunately has had a couple of injuries since. It'll be really interesting to see what kind of development, you know, him returning. We talked about Blake Griffin not being the same and Oladipo not being the same. It'll be really interesting to see if Durant can return to the top of the heap.
Well, one of the great things about Kevin Durant at 6'10", 6'11", 7 feet, however tall he is, he was able to put the ball on the deck and go strong to the basket and finish. We'll have to see whether he still has that element to his game. First possession, he took the ball on the wing, went in and dunked the ball, which was a good sign for Brooklyn Nets fans. And I don't think Kevin Durant's going to have any problem scoring. I think he's still going to be an elite scorer because he has that really nice soft touch from all over the court. So I think that he may not score as much going to the basket as he did in years past, but he'll still be able to put up 25 points a game with ease. I think that his play on the court is not going to be an issue. It's just funny how he's embraced the role of villain. You know, now when I listen to Kevin Durant talk, if you look up surly in the dictionary, I think you'd see his picture. He just seems very unhappy, like Kyrie, about the media universe around him. And, you know, those guys, I wish they could find a way to embrace it and enjoy it, because they're going to be one of the better teams in the league, and they're going to have the media spotlight on them all season long.
Yeah, I don't understand their off-court shenanigans either, I'll be honest with you. All right, let's continue on in the Atlantic Division. Boston is pretty much the same team as last year, although obviously Hayward is no longer with them. Tristan Thompson is. Jason Tatum is quickly becoming one of the best players, obviously, in basketball. Kemba Walker, I don't know. Sometimes he's really good. Sometimes he's sort of lost on the court. I can't figure him out sometimes. But, I mean, Boston's obviously going to be a playoff team and probably a top 4 team.
Yeah, I think Tristan Thompson will be a nice addition for them. He'll give them some defense and rebounding off the bench. Last year, they used Enes Kanter in that backup role, and he can score it in the post, but he's terrible on the defensive end. If you're a team that has ambitions of going deep into the playoffs, you need a defensive mentality. And I think Tristan Thompson will help in that area. Of course, they lose some depth with Gordon Hayward going to Charlotte. You know, that eliminates one of their wing scoring options. But as you said, David, Jason Tatum is a monster. I guess he measured in at 6'10" at training camp, and what he can do as a scorer at all 3 levels. he is going to become one of the top 10 or 15 players in the league. And I think that Tatum will make sure the Celtics maintain their status as a contender. They may be just a little bit short in the backcourt. You mentioned Kemba Walker. He had the stem cell injection in his knees to try to improve that situation. And we'll see whether or not he can become the player that he was, a couple of years ago in Charlotte. But I know that they're keeping their fingers crossed in Boston that he can come back at 100%. Boston is a contender, but whether or not they can get all the way to the finals, I'm not so sure.
All right, Philadelphia, another team with a lot of talent, pretty much the same as last year. Embiid, who I think when he wants to play, I think he's the best center in basketball. Ben Simmons, incredible all-around talent, but I'm telling you, if he can't shoot free throws, especially late in the game, he's going to be a detriment in that area. Tobias Harris, I don't understand. When I saw him out in Los Angeles, incredible player, but he just didn't seem to bring it to Philadelphia for whatever reason. They're going to go back to playing him at power forward instead of the small forward position. So really the big change is their head coach in Philadelphia.
Yeah, and we've talked about Doc Rivers, the fact that, he didn't do the best of jobs in L.A. He got a lot of criticism for what happened when they blew that 3-1 lead in the playoff series against the Nuggets in the bubble. But above and beyond that, I didn't think he got the best out of his personnel. They've had loaded rosters, especially last season with Paul George and Kawhi Leonard and a deep bench. And now he's going to Philadelphia. They brought in some more players who can shoot. They brought in Seth Curry, who they're hoping can be a sniper off the bench. And, they're going to try a little bit of a different system around Simmons and Embiid, but it always goes back to the same issues. Ben Simmons is a reluctant shooter. He's not going to give you any spacing in terms of his ability to knock down threes. And Joel Embiid plays when he's motivated, and a lot of games we'll see him just kind of loaf through games. So Doc will try some new things to motivate this group. We'll have to wait and see at least a half a season to see if they're going to be any different. But my guess is Philadelphia is a notch below the top contenders in the East.
All right, Toronto's a year removed from winning the championship. Obviously, Kawhi Leonard was the big difference between one year to the next. I mean, he was the frosting on the cake. That's why they won the championship that year. Otherwise, Toronto's pretty much the same cast of characters as they were last season.
I think Toronto really overachieved. That's why Nick Nurse got Coach of the Year last season. They did suffer some losses. Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka, who were their tag team tandem in the middle, both left in free agency. And they brought in Aaron Baines, a player who I like, who's kind of added a three-point shot to his arsenal, but he's not an elite center by any means. Also, Kyle Lowry, he's in his mid-30s now. How much longer can he be a go-to guy in that offense? They're kind of handling him with kid gloves during the preseason. I don't think he played in their preseason opener. They signed Fred VanVleet, the Rockford native, to the big money extension. Pascal Siakam started out like a house of fire last year. He looked like one of the best players in the league, and he kind of tailed off the second half of the season and really didn't play well down in the bubble. I think they're going to take a drop this year. I think Toronto really was over their skis last year. I think that's a team that's going to drop into the bottom half of the playoff seeding.
All right, we mentioned Brooklyn being a soap opera. Well, across the whatever river it is in New York, the Hudson maybe, the Knicks are going to be a soap opera also, obviously. I mean, they're just a collection of players. They do have some young talent. I mean, Barrett is a really good player. I think he's got a ceiling that's pretty high. Obi Toppin, he's going to be an interesting player, obviously, there as well. But the story is going to be Thibs. I mean, let's face it. And they're already making fun because, your coaches got to wear masks, but he can't scream through that mask, and he has to scream to be Tom Thibodeau. So I don't know. They're going to be a bottom feeder, once again.
Yeah, it's funny. Our friend Nick Friedel tweeted that out right away, saying that Tibbs is already at war with the mask, trying to yell instructions every time down court with the mask over his face. So that's going to be a big soap opera for New York, trying to see if Tibbs strangles himself with that mask during the course of the season. The personnel is a mismatch, but that Tibbs will get the most out of that roster. They don't really have great talent on that team. They'll probably get more wins than they should, just because Tibbs will demand that they focus in on the defensive end, and they'll only play 7 or 8 guys and try to maximize their ability to win. But they need to have a major infusion of talent, and I think it's going to be a couple of years before they can actually seriously think about doing something in the East.
All right, we'll go through the Southeast Conference to wrap up the Eastern Conference, or Southeast Division to wrap up the Eastern Conference. Obviously, Miami is the class of that division, no question. They're pretty much the same team as last year. Bam is back with a new contract. Jimmy's back, obviously. Pretty much the same cast of characters. They've added Avery Bradley. I mean, I don't know how much better they're going to be, and they're a team that obviously plays very cohesive with each other, and they hustle like no tomorrow. I just don't think they have the talent to beat any team that comes out of the West ultimately.
It's going to be interesting to see what comes next for the Miami Heat. They're another team that overachieved in the bubble. Credit to Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo and to Eric Spoelstra, that whole group. They were remarkable. I mean, as you know, I'm a Bucks fan, and they dispatched them with ease. They took them out so quickly and had answers for everything that Giannis wanted to do in that series. I think they have an excellent defensive system. That's always defense first under Spoelstra and Pat Riley. And I think that that's going to be their calling card. But you wonder about guys like Kendrick Nunn and Duncan Robinson and even Tyler Hero. Are they really that good, or did they just hit lightning in a bottle in the bubble and maybe they'll take a step back this year? Jimmy's a great player, but now people are anointing him as the top 10 player in the league. Okay, he was based on what he did in the bubble, but over the body of work for his entire career, I don't know if you could necessarily say that. It's going to be incumbent on Jimmy to keep showing that progression. Bam Adebayo was rewarded with a max contract, but is he really a max player? It's going to be fascinating to see if they can continue what they showed in the bubble, or if maybe the Heat as well takes a step back this year.
All right, Atlanta's the team that I'm sort of curious to be watching. Our good friend Kelly Kroll. I mean, she's got a new team she's got two teams in Atlanta, both the Braves and now the Hawks. Both teams on the rise. Atlanta's going to be an interesting team. They're pretty deep. I mean, there's a lot of raw talent on this team. Trae Young is obviously very good. They added Bogdanovich. Our good buddy Chris Dunn is there. Rondo is there also, although neither one has played because they're both bothered by injuries right now. But here's a team that's got a lot of talent throughout their roster. If they all develop at the same time, this could be a team on the rise pretty quickly.
Yeah, I saw a little bit of their preseason opener, and they shot the ball really well. Trae Young, of course, there's never a question about his shooting. But Gallinari looked very comfortable in that system, and he shot the ball well. The problem that's going to be for Lloyd Pierce is how do you stagger the minutes? They have too many players. We talked about their roster in a previous show where they're too deep at every position, and especially up front. I don't know where the guys that they drafted in the top 10 last year, DeAndre Hunter and Cam Reddish, those guys could kind of get lost in the shuffle because they have Gallinari and John Collins up front. They brought in Clint Capella, who finally got a chance to play after having an injury when he came over with the trade with Houston. They drafted Onyeka Okongwu. They have 5 guards they want to play. It's going to be very interesting to see how they're going to manage minutes, but the talent is certainly there. I would think Atlanta is going to be a playoff team, definitely. They'll probably be in that playoff mix, the play-in mix at 7, 8, 9, 10. I don't know if they're going to be in 7, 8 or if they're going to be one of the teams trying to fight their way in, but I like what they did very much in the offseason, and I think they're going to be a playoff team this year.
All right, you mentioned Charlotte a little bit earlier with LaMelo Ball. Obviously, he's going to be a player that people are going to spend some money on eventually to go and see in person. Coupled with Gordon Hayward, they're still obviously lacking in a lot of areas, but at least Charlotte finally got a player that people are going to want to see in LaMelo Ball.
LaMelo Ball is going to be the showcase, as I mentioned. He can pass the ball as well as anybody in the league right now, and I think he's really going to get better shots for that young group. We've seen a lot of Charlotte over the last couple of years. They added Terry Rozier from Boston in that sign and trade deal, which what turned out to be with Kemba Walker. And Rozier is a guy that's hot and cold. Some days he's got the long-range shot going and he can look really good. Other days he looks downright terrible. We'll have to see if their other backcourt player can improve off of what he did last season when he's one of the most improved players in the league. Up front, they got P.J. Washington and Miles Bridges and Cody Zeller. That's really just a collection of average players. I think Charlotte will be improved with the addition of Gordon Hayward. He'll give them some added perimeter scoring that they didn't have last year. But I think that it's still a team that's kind of developing. They may be in the mix with that play-in situation as well. Devontae Graham was the guy whose name escaped me for a while. He was one of the most improved players in the league last year. I think that they're a team that's going to be better, but I don't know necessarily that they're a team that can claim a playoff spot this year.
All right, Washington, there was a team that finished outside looking up at the playoffs. They may or may not be better this year. Avdia, we talked about him earlier on. He had a nice debut in his first preseason game, going 6 of 6 from the field. I do like Davis Bertans. He's that literal stretch 4 power forward who can shoot from all over the court, and he cashed in on that ability. Westbrook is there, obviously. and Beal is still there. They'll be an interesting team. They'll score a lot of points. They'll also probably give up a lot of points.
Yeah, I'm not a big Westbrook fan, so it'll be interesting to see how he fits with Bradley Beal. I don't know if they're going to clash on the court in terms of their playing styles. The guys they drafted the last couple of years, and Rui Hachimura and Denny Avdia, we'll see how those guys develop. I think the jury's still out on just how good those guys are going to be. They have some depth issues both in the front court and in the back court. A lot of people say they're going to make a big jump. I've seen people say that they're a lock to make the playoffs. I'm not so sure. I mean, there's going to be 10 teams that are going to be involved in the playoffs in the East when you include the play-in group, and I don't know if Washington is going to be in that mix as well. I think you look at the Wizards, you look at Atlanta, Charlotte, and maybe Orlando. One of those teams for sure is going to be left out, and it could be Washington.
Or it could be Orlando, and they're the last team on our list here. They still have Aaron Gordon, who I really like as a player. I don't know. They're a team that seems to be pretty void of overall talent.
Yeah, Jonathan Isaac, a guy who came on strong at the beginning of last season, suffered a serious knee injury. He's going to miss all of this season, so they'll lose the development of that young forward that they thought would fit in well with their mix. They've still got Vucevic and Fournier, and they have high hopes for some of their other backcourt players. But I think that's a team that could take a fall. That maybe you're right. That could be the team that misses the entire play-in situation completely.
All right, as I alluded to earlier on, next week we're going to preview the Western Conference, but we'll do a little bit of a tease here because obviously Steph Curry will be back this season. It's unfortunate that Klay Thompson unfortunately had that Achilles injury and he's going to miss another year. That just sucks for him and basketball junkies like ourselves. But Steph Curry is back, and here's Steve Kerr talking about Steph Curry's first game back in the preseason last night.
It's great to see him out on the floor. And I think he looks really good physically. That's the main thing. He worked so hard in the off season, and he's in great shape. And now it's just a matter of getting his timing and his rhythm down. But he's definitely a sight for sore eyes.
And Steve Kerr's a sight for sore eyes also. He was our go-to guy back in the day when everybody else at times didn't want to talk in the locker room, Mark, and you know this. You could always go get a soundbite from Steve Kerr. And Steve Kerr was as honest as the day is long. You would always get not only a good soundbite, you'd get an honest soundbite. And now as a head coach, obviously with titles behind him, both as a player and a coach, he steps on his soapbox a lot also. And I have no problem with almost anything that man ever says.
Yeah, if you follow Steve on social media, he's not afraid to get into the political arena and make some strong comments there as well. And back in his playing days, as you mentioned, David, we love to talk to Steve because he had that really sarcastic wit, that self-deprecating humor. And he was a hell of a player. He had a great NBA career, one of the best three-point shooters in NBA history. And we always root for Steve Kerr to do well. He's got his work cut out for him. The West is loaded. He won't have Klay Thompson. They're getting off to a rocky start with Draymond Green and James Wiseman not being available we're not exactly sure what the reasons are there. It's going to be a tough thing for Golden State in the West, but I'm a Steve Kerr fan and I'll always root for him to do well.
Absolutely. A couple more tidbits before we get out of here, Mark. The money continues to flow in the NBA. I mean, most of it, came very early on in free agency over the first week. But Paul George signed a monster 4-year extension for $190 million. I guess he won out. He got rid of his coach in Doc Rivers, and he also broke the bank, $45 million per season. So Paul George should be a happy camper. He's not always a happy camper, but he sure should be.
Yeah, that's the old saying, spending good money after bad. They made the commitment to bring him over, gave up a treasure trove of draft picks, along with Danilo Gallinari and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who really came on strong at Oklahoma City last year. So you gave up all that talent, all those draft assets to acquire Paul George. They couldn't let him walk away after 2 seasons in Southern California. So I think their front office kind of felt like they really had no choice but to give him a max extension. And I don't know, Paul George, his playoff resume, not impressive. His injury history is also a little bit troublesome. They may regret that long-term extension down the line, but given the reality of the situation, they had no other choice.
All right, and a couple of nuggets from college basketball before we get out of here. Illinois has now lost a couple of non-conference games. They lost initially to Baylor. They didn't play well in that game, and then they lost over the weekend to Missouri. They fell way behind early on. They battled back to tie it pretty late in regulation, but then finally lost it in the last minute or two. What do you make out of the Illini? I'm going to continue to say you got to get the big guy involved earlier in the game. I mean, I know DeSumo had an incredible game. He scored 36 the other night. But ultimately, you got to get that big guy involved, and you got to do it earlier in the game.
Yeah, I thought Missouri played really well the other night. I give a lot of credit to them. You know, they came in undefeated. It's the bragging rights game. They knew that they could really improve their resume by knocking off Illinois in that game. And I thought that Missouri played, an outstanding game. So I want to give them a lot of credit. The thing that bothers me most about Illinois is their penchant for just throwing the ball away. The turnovers are just mind-boggling. I tweeted the other night, everyone was raving about the Andre Curbelo, the freshman point guard. He's flashy. He's got some Iverson to his game. He goes between the legs and tries to split double teams. But I'll tell you what, his decision-making is horrible. And he's just a freshman. He'll get better as he goes along. And I think eventually he'll be a very good player in the Big Ten. But right now, he's going to hurt them in a lot of games because he tries things that he's not physically capable of doing right now. Io hurt them late in the Missouri game with a couple of charges where, he kind of just puts his head down and ignores the other four players on the court. They have some issues. I don't think they're a particularly well-coached team. They have a ton of talent. And as you mentioned, the big guy who did get involved for stretches in the Missouri game where he looked like a force, he's so dominant in terms of his physical stature. They do need to get him the ball more often. And I think really, David, that the coaching is a bit of a situation down at the U of I.
Interesting. All right, final thing. Speaking of coaches, Coach K at Duke. Illinois did win at Duke earlier in the week, but then Coach K afterwards just sort of got on his soapbox and sort of criticized the NCAA for even playing games during this COVID situation. And let's face it, a lot of college games have already been canceled. And then Coach K decided, or along with his administration at Duke, they've canceled the rest of their non-conference games. Is this sort of like, what do you make out of Coach K's thoughts overall?
Well, he was right with what he said. The problem was when he said it. He said it after losing a game in the ACC Big Ten Challenge to Illinois at home, and it came off a little bit of sour grapes. And then the Alabama head coach, Nate Oates, piled on by saying, well, would he have said that if he hadn't suffered 2 non-conference losses at home? And, of course, Nate Oates later apologized because he really had no business saying that. I mean, a lot of people, you and I can say something like that, but for a guy in the coaching fraternity to step out, especially a guy like Nate Oates, who's only in his second year, he was associated with the Bulls, wasn't he, for a while, Nate Oates?
Yes, he was. Yeah.
Yeah. So, for him to come out and say that, that was not good form on his part. I think what Coach K said was right. It is questionable whether or not we should keep trying to play these college games when, kids are getting the virus left and right, and they're postponing and canceling games. It just was the forum that he used to express those thoughts that had people saying, well, if you had won that game, would you have picked that time to say it?
And finally, on the college level, not specifically basketball, but just collegiate athletics, Jim Phillips, who it's not official yet, but apparently he's going to be offered the commissioner of the ACC conference, of which Duke, of course, is a member. And he's been the athletic director at Northwestern now for, I don't know, the last 10 or 15 years. I'm going to be honest with you, Mark. This is going to be a big loss for Northwestern. Jim Phillips is as good as there is as an athletic director. He will be a great commissioner, and someday he might even be president of the NCAA. And I think the Big Ten made a major mistake of not hiring him to be the commissioner of the Big Ten Conference when they had a chance a couple of years ago. This is a big loss, and I'll be honest with you. I've met a lot of people in sports over all my times. He might be one of the most impressive people I've met ever in any kind of sport at any level. Jim Phillips, congratulations if he's going to become the commissioner of the ACC conference, but a major loss for Northwestern as well.
Well, Jim Phillips is a fantastic guy. He's one of the best athletic directors in the country. Of course, he made his mark at Northern Illinois, where we all got a chance to know him, and then he went over to Northwestern. And when you consider the improvements they made with that beautiful football facility on the lakefront and all the improvements they made in facilities and renovation of Welsh Ryan Arena, they've done so much in terms of just improving facilities in making commitments to the coaching staff in terms of improving their budgets and their facilities, that they can do a better job of recruiting on a national level. What he's done at Northwestern is an incredible success story. And I agree with you, David. The Big Ten should have, when they had the chance to make him the commissioner of that conference, instead for him to most likely go out to the ACC is unfortunate. And just on a personal level, I really have the most high regard for Jim. When my son Eric was looking at law schools, I called Jim and said that he's considering Northwestern, and he called the dean of the law school and said, "Hey, I've got a kid you want to keep an eye out for." And he didn't have to do that. And he's just a wonderful guy. And, I know he'll do a fantastic job as commissioner of the ACC. It's too bad we couldn't keep him here in the Midwest.
One of the most personable people I think I've ever met, like I said, in sports, period. And I wish him all the success if indeed he does get offered that job. And I'm sure he probably will, and I'm sure he'll probably accept it. Anyway, Mark, as always, fun talking to you here today. Like I said, on our next podcast next week, we'll go over the Western Conference. 2 more Bulls preseason games will be in the can, and then it'll be the regular season right after that. So I'll look forward to next week, Mark.
Yeah, it's hard to believe the season starts a week from Tuesday. I mean, it's crazy, but we're going to have our Christmas hoops, and that's a good Christmas present for you and I.
And look at the big difference between us on the screen here. You got all those books behind you. You come across so studious. That's the way you're supposed to have it on these, Zoom things. And I got this big open blank room behind me, which I don't know, maybe it's symbolic. I'm not really sure.
Well, I can take everybody, behind the curtain a little bit. Being members of the media, we get mailed books all the time. Most of these are books that were mailed to me that I've never read, so I'll fess up to that.
I guess I'm not on those same list. Anyway, Mark, have a safe week, and we'll talk next week.
All right, David, look forward to it.
Thanks. Talk to you later again, folks.